Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial video where I will show you how to construct a classic string bikini and a bathing suit with two different methods. First of all, we are going to build up a bikini from existing patterns, and then after that we will draw the patterns for the bathing suit directly on the avatar on the 3D window. And we will continue from there to build up the bathing suit. So I'm going to open my library and go to my patterns folder, and I'm going to open a DXF file, right click and add to workspace, and here OK. In my case I have some half patterns, so I need to select Edit Pattern Tool, Z, to be able to do right click on the line in the middle and select Unfold Symmetric Editing with Sewing. And here as well, and here as well. Now I have some symmetric patterns that I want to select and apply symmetric pattern with sewing, doing right click on them with Transform Pattern Tool. And now I'm going to do the same for this two here. Okay. Now that we have our patterns like this, I'm going back to the library and I'm going to go into the avatar folder, female v2, and in here I'm going to choose this avatar, for instance, Camila. When we add the avatar, we get it with the preset skin texture, in this case black underwear. To work with lingerie or swimwear, we probably want to get rid of this underwear. To change the texture, I'm going to go in this texture folder, and here I have another folder called FB2 Camila. In here I have three different images, and the last one, this one, has no underwear. So I'm going to go with this one. If I go to the avatar and click on her chest, in the property editor I see an image on the texture tab. I can select and drag my new texture here to change it. I click on it and drag it to the texture tab, and here we go. Now we have a different texture with no underwear. Now I'm going to select all my patterns and move them a bit up with the gizmo to be able to have a clear view of the avatar, and then I can use the arrangement points to locate all the patterns around the avatar. First the top, now this one, then the back, something like this. Okay. And now for the piece on the crotch, this little piece here, I'm not going to use any arrangement point. In fact, I'm going to deactivate them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my free sewing tool to be able to sew this pattern piece to the back, here, and then to the front. So from here to here, then to the front, and now I can go to the 3D window to right click on my pattern and search for superimpose side, and then this piece will be correctly located like this. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to do the rest of the sewing. For that I'm going to select segment sewing tool, and I'm going to start by sewing the sides on the bottom and now on the top for the strips here. So I have some points. You can also have notches, or you can also work with free sewing tool as you like. Okay, and then in the 3D window we can always check that the threads look okay. I'm going to close this dart in here, and then in this case for the front top part I want the patterns to be crossed, so I've selected free sewing tool to get this blue dot, which is going to give me the final length that I need for the sewing. You can always also try to select the patterns and move them bit closer to the avatar, so when you simulate, it's going to be easier and you'll have a better result. For that, we can also select all the patterns and try to strengthen them. So again, this will help the simulation. Let's see. Okay. Now, while simulating, we can also try to do a fitting with the hand. And for example, for me, something like this. Okay. And then on the bottom as well, I'm going to pull it up. If we hide the avatar with Shift A or directly in the toggle bar, we see that the crotch, this part here, is not looking okay. So we are going to change the pose of the avatar. We go to the toggle bar and we activate Show X-ray, and now we get to see the skeleton and the joints of the avatar. If I click on one of these joints, my gizmo appears, and I can move my leg by using it. But over it, I have a little figure. If I activate it by clicking on it, it becomes blue, and this means that I can change both legs at the same time by just moving and changing the joint of one of them. Now that I have spread them, I can deactivate the X-ray and simulate again to see it is going to look much better. And now it's flat. Now we want to have the lining for the bikini. This is very simple. We select all the pattern pieces in the 2D window and do right click on top of them, and then we select Layer Clone Under. When we do so, we get the silhouette of the new lining patterns appearing, and I can place them, for instance, here. And then the lining is not only created, but also correctly placed under the shell. And all the sewings are already done, so if I simulate, I see it's perfectly stable. So now that we know that everything works, we are going to add the ribbon for the top. So we go to the library and search for the hardware and trims folder. Then inside it, we go to the ribbon folder. In here, we have different ribbons, but notice that these ones are trims, and we want to add them as a garment. We want to have the pattern pieces. So we go to the pack folder. I am going to choose this ribbon shape, which I like, for example. So I do right click and select Add to Workspace. Now that we have it, we can do click on this target here we have next to it on the 3D window, which is going to help us relocate the ribbon. In my case, I want it on the back. And now I can select the patterns in the 2D window and relocate them next to where I want to sew it. I need to draw an internal line with polygon internal line G in the middle of the back, and then on this piece on the middle of the ribbon. So I'm able to now sew one with the other one. So select free sewing tool, and then I can just simply sew it while pressing Shift. And then in the 3D window I can check that the threads are okay, and I can simulate. Now we are going to go with the fabric. We have these two fabrics by default, so let's go to the library and choose the ones we want. So in my case, I have a lycra for the shell and another one for the lining. I'm going to add them both to the object browser by double-clicking on them. And now, if I do right-click on the 3D window background, I can select Hide Show and Hide All, so I get to see the texture of the fabric and not the orange strengthened color. Now I'm going to apply the shell fabric, the lycra one, to the shell, and then the lycra lining for the lining in here. And then all the others, I can just click in this icon to delete them. Okay, now if I take a look, I see my texture. Remember, you can always edit the texture with the Edit Texture tool in both windows. So I can scale it, I can rotate it, and I can move my texture. If I select my fabric and go to the Texture tab under the Property Editor, I see the image for my texture. Now let's imagine I need to have a print on my bikini. In my case, I have this image here that I would like to combine with the image of the texture. So next to the texture tab, I have an option called Open Texture Editor. We get a message saying that the image is going to be saturated, but only in this window. So as you see now, it's blue or green. Now I can select Add in here to add my image, so I can look for it in my computer, say Open. Okay, now I need to use the gizmo on the corner to adjust it to the window. So in this case, I don't have a repetition, it's just an image. I can change the order of my images. I can put the print under the main texture or on top. And I can change the blend mode, for example, multiply or normal or average. You have many options. And also for the main texture, now I'm going to select desaturation, so I can properly see the colors of my print. And then once you have it, you can select apply and close. Now my texture is desaturated, so I can activate the color, so I see the colors of the print, but not the blue color of the main texture because it was desaturated in the texture editor. Now I can again work with my edit texture tool in the 3D window to relocate the print as I like. And for instance, for the lightning, I would like a flat color, so I select the fabric, go to the color tab, and I am going to apply one of these I have here. Okay, now let's move on. Another thing we can do is we can add some top stitching. In here in the object browser, we have for now a default top stitch. The first thing I can do is I can customize it by changing the name. And then in the property editor, I can continue changing, for example, the offset, the stitch count, the shape, the length, and also the thickness. For example, I'm going to write 100. And then also I can change the color in the color tab. And now with the free top stitch tool, L, we can do some top stitching. If I take a look inside, I don't see it because I need to customize this as well. So if I go down and reach the configuration, I can change the face to the back, and then I will see it in the inside of the fabric. Now I can continue doing the top stitching on the top. In my case, I'm doing it in the lining, but you could also do it in the shell, of course, and for example in the ribbon as well, if you'd like. Now, if we take a side view of the avatar, we see this is not straight. The front part is not aligned with the back and with the ribbon. If this happens to you, you can use the basic tape measure avatar to create a tape on the back of the avatar. We use it by doing one click to start. We have some guides, and then I'm going to do different clicks. Click here, here, and then a double click to end, and then it goes yellow, and this means I can use it by selecting Attach to Measure Avatar. I do one click on the pattern outline and then one click on the basic tape, and this means it's going to be attached. Now I need to select the ribbon and I need to deactivate the pattern and the sewing. This way, when we simulate, the fabric is going to reach the basic tape we made, but the ribbon is not going to move. Now we can activate the ribbon again and relocate it with the gizmo and then simulate again. Right now the shell fabric is streffing. I can show streffing and we see how the shell is streffing and going to simulate, and then we can unstrengthened, so we see really how the bikini fits now that it's properly simulated and everything is stable. We can also add some puckering. So I'm going to select the free puckering tool, and then in the object browser we have a default puckering. We can change the material from cotton to nylon, for example, and then we can customize it and start applying some puckering. We can take a closer view. Right now it looks like this, but then we can continue customizing it by changing, for instance, the density and the width until we obtain a result that we like. Something like this for me, for example. Now we can load down the particular distance of the bikini and simulate again to get a final result. And here we go, we have our bikini done. In this second part, we are going to build up a bathing suit from scratch, and this means we are going to create the patterns directly in here. For that, we are using the 3D Pen Avatar tool, which you can find on the 3D window toolbar. With this tool, we can draw directly on the skin of the avatar and then obtain the patterns from it. To start working with this tool, we need to do one click, and then we can do straight lines or curved lines. We can do curved lines if we press Ctrl, and then if we stop pressing Ctrl, we can do straight lines again, and we obtain each time we do a segment point, we obtain the length of the line, and then if we press Shift, we get these guidelines, so we can make sure we are doing a straight line. If I press Ctrl again, then I have my curved lines again. And then to finish my drawing, my shape, I go back to the initial point. For example, here I have a first shape for a pattern. So I change tools to flatten, and then I go on top of the shape, I do one click and enter. And then I have a piece of pattern located in the 2D window and the 3D window on top of the avatar in the same place where I created it. Then I can relocate it, and once I have it in the 2D window, I can use the Edit Pattern tool to modify the shape of the pattern. Now I'm going to go back to the 3D Pen Avatar tool to continue drawing the bottom part of the bathing suit. I'm going to start on the side and press again Shift to do a straight line and reach the center of the avatar. Then I'm going to go down to the crotch. I can Shift, and then I can press Ctrl again to do a curved line and go again to the side and up to close my shape. Then again, Flatten tool, one click to select the shape and then enter. And then I have my new pattern. Now, same as before, we can move the pattern in the 2D window and modify it a bit. For example, in the center line, I need it to be straight. I need to modify this here and this. And the fast way of changing a curved line into a straight line is adding a point somewhere in the middle, and then you can do right click and delete the point. Then you'll have a straight line. I'm going to do the same in here, so add point, split line, and then I delete it. And now I have my straight line. Now I can continue modifying my pattern with Edit Curvature to change a bit this shape here. And now I think it looks okay. So what I can do is select the patterns, right click, and symmetric pattern with sewing. Now that I have my new patterns placed in the 2D window, I'm going to use the gizmo in the 3D window to move them closer to the avatar. Now we would need to merge the center front of the pattern, so we have only one piece in the end. Okay, and now we can go with the back. I'm going to select again this pattern piece and make a copy of it. So copy and paste. And then I can get the back pattern from the front by just modifying the shape a bit later on. I'm using the gizmo to arrange it a bit. Okay. In between these two patterns, we need to give it more length because I wasn't able to draw on the avatar with my 3D pen in here. So I'm just adding 2 centimeters to the crotch in each side. Now I need also for these 2 strips to reach the back of the neck, where we will have a knot with a bow. So I am also modifying the patterns to change the length, in this case by 5 centimeters. We now have all the patterns correctly placed around the avatar and we can start sewing. I'm starting with segment sewing for the back of the neck, then for the center front, and now I need to change to free sewing because I am missing one segment point in here. But obviously this will depend on your own design, but just to remind you, with free sewing you don't need to have 2 specific segments with the same length to sew one another. And then I can finish with segment sewing again for the sides. Now I still need a strip for the back to also have a knot and a bow. So to create this pattern I need to know the total length for the back, so I'm selecting basic tape measure avatar. To start measuring with one click, then I'm going to click through all the back and then double click when you're finished so you can know the total length. In the 2D window, I select rectangle tool and one click on the background to get this input window where we can write the measurements for our strip. Then this pattern we can also sew it to the front pattern with the free sewing. First to one side only, then in the 3D window we do superimpose side, and then we can sew it to the other side. Like this. Okay, now let's try to simulate a first time and see how it goes. For a better and more stable result, we can use stressing on our patterns so the fabric gets more uptight, more tense. And okay, looks good. Now is when I am modifying a bit the shape of the back pattern I got from the front one. I'm using smooth curve to give it more width, but again, this will depend on your design. Maybe you want a Brazilian shape or a culotte. I don't know. And now if we hide the garment in the toggle bar in the 3D window, we still see the 3D drawing reference on the avatar. So we can choose Edit 3D Pen Avatar to select all the drawing lines while pressing Shift. And then when we have them all, we can do right click on top of the selection and delete. And then we don't see them anymore. And we can reactivate the view of the garment again. We can hide the stressing orange color by right clicking on the background on the 3D window and selecting Show Hide Color and then Hide All. For the bathing suit, as for the bikini, we need to have a lining. For that, we select all the patterns, we do right click and select Layer Clone Under. We place it and now we can simulate to see how it is stable, and we have now 2 layers of fabric. Okay, now let's add the ribbons. We go to Library, then Hardware and Trims, and inside we have a folder named Ribbon. This is a default folder, and inside we have some trims, but in this case we want the ribbons as a C-pack, so as a garment, because we want the fabric to drape naturally during the simulation. You can choose the one you like, so right-click and add to workspace, then OK. Once you have it in your 2D and 3D window, you can click on this Diana here, which will allow you to relocate the garment, so the ribbon, wherever you want. Then you can continue adjusting the position by using the gizmo. Once you leave it close to the center back, you can leave space so you can check the sewing in the 3D window, and we can also reorganize the patterns in the 2D window here. Now we can start sewing, but before that we need 2 internal lines where we want the ribbon to be sewn to the strips. So internal polygon line, and I draw 2 internal lines, 1 and 2. Now free sewing tool, and I can sew it to the center back of the neck. You can make sure in the 3D window the threads are correct, and you don't need to reverse them, and then we can simulate and see how it falls. Okay, I'm going to add another one for the back here. For the second ribbon I am doing the same, and I also need 2 internal lines for the sewing, but in this case I also need 1 internal line in the center back. So I select Add Point Split Line and then Uniform Split to create a point exactly in the center, then Polygon Internal Line, and I can draw the line, and now I can use Free Sewing tool while pressing Shift to sew the ribbon to the back of the bathing suit. Again, we check the sewing and then simulate. Okay, so now we have all the pieces of our bathing suit done. We have all the ribbons and all the patterns and the lining, and we could go now work with the fabric. Right now I only have in my object browser the default fabrics, so I'm going to open the library and I'm going to add 2 new fabrics I have, one for the shell and one for the lining. Now I'm going to select in the 2D window all the patterns for the shell fabric and all the patterns for the lining, and then I'm deleting the rest. Remember, you can always modify the texture on your fabric with Edit Texture 3D or 2D, and you can also add another texture on top. If you go to the Texture tab in the Property Editor of the fabric, we get the message that the fabric is going to be shown with the color texture. Okay. Then to add 1 image on top, we select Add, we select the image, mine's here, and now here I have it. I need to scale it in my texture editor window with the help of this gizmo on the corner. In my case, my image is not a repeat, but maybe yours is. I have to make sure that my other texture is desaturated, and if I want it to be. Then you can select between the different types of blend we saw before already with the bikini. And then I'm choosing multiply. Once I like it, I press apply and close. Now, as I had it desaturated, I can deactivate the option because I already desaturated the base texture. As I said, my print is not a repeat, so I'm adjusting my texture with Edit Texture tool. If you have one texture or print for the lining, you can do the same for that fabric. In my case, I'm just applying a color in the color window. Now for the top stitch is the same. Right now we have a default top stitch, so we can modify it. I saved the one before we used with the bikini, so I'm opening it in the property editor and using it on the bathing suit. Now I've selected a segment top stitch tool to apply top stitching on the top part, on the bottom, and then on the back. You can also use free top stitch tool if you have some segment points or notches. And then let's take a look. I'm going to add 2 more on the sides, and that's it for the top stitching. Okay, well, now our bathing suit is done. If we select the patterns we see in the property editor, the particular distance is at 20. So we can load that down. For the ribbons, the particular distance is 3 already by default. But for the rest of the patterns we did is 20, so we can change that to 5 and simulate again. So we have a better fitting. Another thing we can do is that we see here, especially that the patterns look thin. So we can change the add thickness rendering in the property editor. So we give the fabric more thickness visually, so it looks more realistic. Okay, and I think this would be it. We have the bathing suit done, and now we could do the renders of it. I hope you liked this tutorial and that it helped you, and see you in the next one.